Hello, everybody. Welcome along. My name is Benjamin Bloom. This is the Benjamin Bloom Football Channel. Please leave your bias at the door and join us to discuss the Mitrovic myth. Yes, I cover the Championship, and pretty much every second season, I'm talking about a hulk of a Serbian striker who's an absolute goal machine at Championship level. But the myth, or is it a myth, is that he can't do it at Premier League level. I'm going to look at the numbers, look at the evidence, and look at the conceived wisdom and tell you what I think, because believe me, I get asked about it a hell of a lot. So, Mitrovic has just equalled a Championship record. When we say Championship, obviously we're going from 2004, 2005. You're entitled to have your views on that, whether you think it should go back further. But he's equalled Ivan Toney's 31 goals. Look, he's done it in 28 games as well. So he's on absolute fire here. And then we're looking back at Lee Hughes for West Brom. And then Guy Whittingham got 42 goals if we want to go even further back in the record books. But the truth is that Mitrovic is having an amazing season. But it seems to be that the wider football world gets more and more wound up and cross with Mitrovic with every goal he scores at Championship level. So I had a look on Twitter. I typed in Mitrovic the day after the goal was scored. And you can see there Sport Bible have put out a very complimentary tweet about him equaling Toney's record and having 16 games to go. So I had a look at the replies, and believe me, this is not me going and fishing for replies here because I've got some confirmation bias. No. Look, go and look at the tweet yourself and you can see the replies. Let's read out a couple. Saley at the top there, who looks like a Birmingham fan. Bet he can't wait to score 6 next season in the Premier League. You'll have to forgive any of the particular typing or grammatical issues on Twitter. It's Twitter. There you go. I'm going to the right. Jay. He's going to score 7 goals max in the Premier League next season. Cornet Vikhorst, who should know about Premier League struggles. He sounds like a Burnley fan. He needs to prove himself in the Premier League, which he hasn't so far. Interesting. Chris there in the middle. Go on to score a maximum of 3 next year. David down the bottom. But his total tripe in the Premier League has had a few goes and never had a good season yet. Wow. And down in the right corner there, Ant NFFC, he's a Nottingham Forest fan. Interesting. It's all about knowing your level. We'll do nothing in the Premier League again. So, look, this is the conceived wisdom of football fans. And believe me, I speak to football fans every day doing this. So I'll read out the most extreme there. Needs to prove himself in the Premier League. Is total tripe in the Premier League. Will do nothing in the Premier League. Okay? So that's not me creating a narrative out of thin air. You do it. Just type Mitrovic and you know what people say, don't you? So, first of all, here are Mitrovic's Championship stats, which seem to pour fuel on the fire of the people that get very, very cross about Aleksandar Mitrovic. The truth is, and I think we all need to do this, if you want to form a balanced view on this, which I assume you do if you've already watched me bang on about it for 3.5 minutes, the conceived wisdom is that Mitrovic can't do it at Premier League level. So his Championship stats are actually almost irrelevant, but people tend to view it as a zero-sum game, i.e. the more goals he scores at Championship, that almost proves the rule of something that's almost unrelated, really, but related at the same time. You tell me. So look, he's amazing in the Championship, isn't he? 4 goals for Newcastle as a youngster. They're not really in the team, only 1,000 minutes. Fulham 17-18, 12 goals, 1 assist. And by the way, a lot of this is going to be predicated on goals and pure goal output. That's what the conceived wisdom is. We're also not judging intangibles of what else he does for his team. Does he bring them up the pitch? Does he hold the ball up? Does he wear centre-halves down for other players? Does he link up? Is he good in the dressing room? All of that stuff not really going to be taken into account. But then again, the conceived wisdom doesn't. So he shot Fulham to promotion in 17-18 as a loanee. And then look, 26 goals and 3 assists in 19-20, top scorer, and already 31 this season. So he has got 73 goals in the Championship at a rate of a goal every 121 minutes per goal. So basically, if you play Aleksandar Mitrovic for, well, times that by 240 minutes, 2 and a bit games there, 180, 2.5-ish games, he'll score 2 goals. So he's a goal machine at championship level. I've added the goal contributions in as well. There's 17 assists going in there as well. So every 98 minutes, so virtually every game. Remember, these stats never take into account stoppage time as being a thing. They assume a game is 90 minutes, just to be clear. Every 98 minutes, he gets a goal or an assist. So we need to say it. He is amazing at championship level, an absolute goal machine. But remember, all the conceived wisdom only concerns his Premier League record. So it is relevant and it's not relevant. Do you want to make it relevant or do you not want to make it relevant? I'm going to mention it anyway. Here are his Premier League stats, which are not as good. But the first thing we should say is take a sample of 1,000 football players who have played in the Championship and the Premier League, and you would expect 999, maybe 990, to have a better output at Championship level than Premier League, wouldn't you? That sounds pretty obvious, don't you, that a player is going to have a better output at an easier level, right? I don't know. Patrick Bamford, he scored more goals in the Premier League than the Championship, didn't he? But there you go. There'll probably be the odd outlier. So, look, in 2015-16, Mitrovic got 9 goals and 4 assists for a Newcastle team that got relegated. And this is the first theme we need to bring up. When we remember, this is a team sport. And if you play for a team that's not very good, probably the same player, and I'm stating the bleeding obvious again, will score more goals for a team that's good than a team that's not very good. Just throwing that out there as a concept early in the video. In 17-18, look, he didn't get played, did he? But his goals per games ratio is pretty good. 1 goal, and he played 89 minutes, so there you go. Now, this is the one that probably is the weapon that apologists for Mitrovic will use the most. Fulham, 18-19, 11 goals, 3 assists across pretty much a whole season there. That's the only time he's got close to playing a whole season as well, 3,282 minutes. So 14 goal contributions, 11 goals, 3 assists in the Premier League in a team that was relegated as well. That was the team of Jukanovic and then Ranieri and then Parker latterly, who we know doesn't really fancy Mitrovic, because this is the one that his detractors obsess on. 3 goals, 3 assists in 2021. Couple of mitigating factors though. He only played 1,390 minutes, so by no means anywhere near the full season. And Fulham were terrible that season. They didn't create many chances. They didn't score many goals. I think Bobby Reeve, we're going to look at it later, was actually their top scorer with 5. Mitrovic had lots of issues with Scott Parker. He broke a curfew and caught COVID, didn't he? So I think there's a few mitigating factors. But of course, if you believe in the saying you're only as good as your last game or you're only as good as your last season, then people will focus on that. But how much you focus on that one season as opposed to the others with 13 goal contributions and 14 goal contributions, I think in the interest of balance, you should focus on all 3, although understandably, and I think we all admit, and I'm sure most of the pro-Mitrovic arguers in the comments will be Fulham fans, that's the size of it. Everyone should admit that wasn't a good season for Mitrovic. Does one bad season in the Premier League make you incapable at that level? Probably not as well. I'm just going to try and add some balance to all of this nonsense. Here are his Premier League averages then. So, 2,878 minutes equates to 76.4 games. So, whether you agree with that rationale of working it, because he made a lot of sub-appearances, particularly in his Newcastle days, didn't he? But it's the equivalent of 76 complete games at 90 minutes. 24 goals in 76 games. 24 goals in 76 games. That sounds very much nearly like 1 goal in 3 games. And he's been relegated 3 times. Just get this as a fact. Mitrovic in the Premier League almost exclusively is in the bottom 3, isn't he? Got relegated with Newcastle and twice with Fulham. Add in the assists as well, 34 goal contributions. So the goals is a goal every 286 minutes in the Premier League. If that's your single factor analysis, goals, we're not going to judge anything else. 286 minutes, so 90, 180, 270. So it's about a goal every 3 games, basically, isn't it? Like we just said. And much better for goal contributions as well. Every 202 minutes, we'll get a goal and assist. And if you want a seasonal average, if you take every minute Aleksandar Mitrovic has played in the Premier League, which I've done because I'm a nerd, and roll it out over a season, you come out with 11.95 goals. Yeah, which is going to be useful later because, so his average, if he were to play every minute of a season, he'd score just under 12 goals. So we can say that someone who scored 12 goals is better than Mitrovic's average over his career, right? Seems fair enough, doesn't it? Let's compare the two. So Championship, 121 minutes per goal. That is exceptionally good. Premier League, 286 minutes per goal. That's not exceptionally good. But is it terrible? We're going to find out. One is clearly better than the other. Way better than the other by a factor of 2.36 times. So I'm saying there, if you use Mitrovic's goals as a single factor analysis, he is 2.36 times more effective at Premier League level than he is at Championship level. Remember, it's probably not the right thing to do to use that as a single factor analysis, even if you just parlay in the fact that when he plays in the Championship, he pretty much gets promoted and his team score loads of goals and have the ball a load. And when he plays in the Premier League, the complete opposite of that is true. And the comment I made earlier, that we would expect all players pretty much to have a better output the lower the level they go. Makes sense. Is the disparity unnatural? Let's find out. Let's talk some more. So this is the conceived wisdom then. If a player scores lots of goals in the Championship and doesn't score lots of goals in the Premier League, then he's not a Premier League level striker. So straight away, if that is the conceived wisdom of people, and if you think Mitrovic is rubbish and that's not your conceived wisdom, tell me. I actually don't agree with the premise of the conceived wisdom, period. And let me tell you why. If a player scores lots of goals in the Championship and doesn't score lots of goals in the Premier League, then he's not a Premier League level striker. I keep saying this. Your ability at Championship is not your ability at Premier League level. Do you know what I mean? I think people are a little bit obsessed with the sheer amount of goals he scores in the Championship, and they're almost judging his Premier League output against his Championship output. When really, maybe they should be judging his Premier League output against his team and the level of the team. And what about judging it against other players in the Premier League rather than himself at Championship level? Surely that would make more sense as a premise, wouldn't it? You tell me in the comments. So, let's go right in at the top because we had Mitrovic at 100... What was it? Let me give you the correct number. I think it's 121 minutes per goal at Premier League level. Sorry, Championship level. And 286 minutes per goal at Premier League level. 286 and 121. Remember those numbers. The best ever, this is according to an article, so you can fact check this. I can't remember the website actually. It was correct as of December, so I don't know whether Salah's has changed. The Aguero's and Henry's certainly won't. But the 3 best ever Premier League goals per minute ratios are Mo Salah, 127 minutes per goal. Thierry Henry, 122. Sergio Aguero, that is incredible, 108 minutes per goal. So look, the greatest ever Premier League strikers in terms of minutes per goal, only one of them, Aguero, has got a better minutes per goal than Mitrovic has at Championship level. And I think this confuses people a little bit. So in Championship equivalents, Mitrovic is better than Thierry Henry in terms of goals per minute. Obviously, Thierry Henry is a far, far better player than Aleksandar Mitrovic. But when people tend to get stuck comparing the two levels. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. So look, Mitrovic, 286 minutes per goal. It's probably no surprise to anybody that people like Salah and Henry and Aguero are over twice as good at Premier League level than Aleksandar Mitrovic is. So I think the first thing we can conclude is Mitrovic is an elite level Championship player, but is nowhere near an elite level Premier League player. Fine. Does that automatically make him a bust? A failure? I'm not entirely sure that it does. Let's look more at the numbers. Right, what I have done here is I have looked at the top scorers for each of the last, for every Premier League team rather, for last season alone, and just kind of compared where would Mitrovic's average stack up against every top scorer in the Premier League, where apparently he's a bust and a failure last season. Well, look at the ones in red there. This is the top half. He would have actually on average been the top scorer at Chelsea, who were the European champions. I think we can probably put that down to an outlier season, can't we? West Ham's an interesting one. What would Mitrovic do for West Ham? Michael Antonio, okay, his minutes per goal are much better, but he only got 10 goals. And we know Mitrovic's seasonal average is 11.95, don't we? Maybe, again, we can put that down to Antonio not playing all the games. But interesting thought piece. Switch Antonio for Mitrovic in the team that's currently fourth in the Premier League. Would West Ham drop off a lot? Would Mitrovic score more goals? A little bit of both? Maybe. I don't know. Here's the bottom half, and you can see lots more red. So if we took Aleksandar Mitrovic's average season, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 of the clubs in the bottom half, he would have been their top scorer. Okay? There's obviously something ridiculous in here because he plays for one of them and he wasn't their top scorer. So obviously I understand the folly of bringing a player's average in against his own performance. But I think we've already fairly and reasonably established that his last Premier League season was his worst, and it was a lot worse than the others. So was Mitrovic's last season an outlier even for him? Let's bring the numbers up there. So in terms of minutes per goal, he beats Neil Maupay. Is that an interesting comparison on his last year's performance? And he also beats Bobby Reid. Again, that is ridiculous because he was at the club but he wasn't playing. And Dave McGoldrick down the bottom there. In terms of actual pure goals, Pedro Neto as well for Wolves. They just didn't have a high top scorer, did they? In terms of actual goals, he would have beaten Neto, Zaha, who's not exactly a striker, is he? Maupay, Reeve, Pereira and McGoldrick. So it's a reasonably simple thought experiment that, it's not even a thought experiment, it's a numbers experiment, that would suggest that in a number of teams, maybe 8 or 9, if you popped the average Mitrovic in over a Premier League season, probably going to be the top scorer in a lot of those teams. And then you need to adjust for team quality because surely as you go higher in the league, a striker gets more chances and the team gets more possession and scores more goals. So you might even, the line might be exponential rather than just pure averages. There you go. So look, adjusting for team quality is something we've spoken about. Mitrovic has played over 1,000 minutes in 3 Premier League seasons. The team he's been playing for has been relegated each time. 18th, 19th and 18th. As I've said, generally these teams have less possession, create less chances, score less goals. So the question I'm asking is, what happens if we compare Mitrovic with other strikers who've played for teams that have got relegated? Look, we've compared him to the best ever, Aguero, Henry and Salah. He's not as good as them, obviously, but should we really be doing that? Thierry Henry probably, his chance conversion is probably better, but he certainly would have had more chances and more opportunities and more of the ball. Anyway, you take my point. So in terms of relegated strikers, what I've done is I've had a look at the last 10 seasons, so 10 years in the Premier League, and I've looked at the top scorer for each relegated team and where does Mitrovic come in terms of a single season, in terms of his average. So remember, his best single season was 11 goals. And his average is actually higher than that when you work it out per minute. It's 11.95, isn't it? If he actually did play a whole season for a club. So at the top of the list, Charlie Austin got 18. Yakubu and Defoe 17 and 15. 2 other players scored more than Mitrovic in a single season, Fletcher and Lafondra. I think we've got to get back to the reason why we're doing this. We're trying to work out, is Mitrovic a bust at Premier League level? Does this prove anything? Well, Jermaine Defoe, I think we can immediately scratch off as not being a bust. He's a brilliant striker. He scored over 100 Premier League goals. Yakubu, Charlie Austin, viable Premier League strikers, aren't they? Stephen Fletcher, yeah, played a lot of years at the top level. I know he's played a lot since with Sheffield Wednesday and Stoke now. Lafondra is an interesting one. Lafondra might be an outlier. He might be one where similar things get spoken, and he might also get the one season wonder tag as well. I don't know. I haven't looked at Lafondra's numbers, But what we do know is that in the past 10 seasons, Mitrovic is actually one of the better relegated strikers. Only 5 players in 10 seasons. Obviously, that's playing for 30 clubs. So assume there's 2 or 3 strikers at all of those clubs. Only 5 out of maybe 90 strikers then have scored more goals in a single season than Mitrovic. There's a few tied with him. Kone. Ings is a very interesting one. I'm glad that name came up. Danny Ings. Just make your comparisons in the comments and what Ings has done and where he's been able to go. How much difference between the two? I think that's an interesting one. Wijnaldum, midfielder, but quality player there. Pukki, Pereira last season for West Brom, in fact. Troy Deeney as well, who I think a lot of people would consider had a decent Premier League career. So when we actually compare Mitrovic to relegated strikers, which is reasonable when we're adjusting for team quality, he's actually one of the best, not one of the worst. And look, let's do a really, really basic bit of maths. Let's say there's been 100 strikers for relegated clubs, so just slightly more than 3 per club over 10 years of 30 clubs getting relegated. Only 5 have bettered him. So he's closing in there on the top 5 percentile in terms of relegated strikers. So I think, look, is Mitrovic an elite Premier League striker to compare with Henry and Salah? No. Is he one of the worst strikers and a failing for relegated teams? No. Complete opposite. He's one of the best looking at the numbers. Again, if you're going to look at the numbers as a single factor analysis on judging a footballer playing in a team that isn't very good. I went into Transfermarkt and looked at the Premier League top scorers of all time to make a comparison and was very happy to notice they give you a goals per minute total. So these are the top scoring Premier League players of all time. I think they've all scored over sort of 50 goals. Mitrovic obviously hasn't done that. He only had 24 or something like that. But in terms of goals per minute, it's very, very interesting. So what I've done is I've looked just slightly above Mitrovic's 286 minutes per goal and slightly below as well. And look, there's Dennis Bergkamp with 30 minutes better. There is Michail Antonio. That's very interesting. 256 minutes per goal, playing in generally a better team. I wonder how close Mitrovic would be to 256 minutes a goal as opposed to 286 minutes per goal if he played for a better team. Andy Carroll, Duncan Ferguson, Josh King, Danny Welbeck, Dele Alli, okay, not a striker. Peter Beardsley, looked great player, but played a lot of his best stuff before the Premier League was even a thing. Craig Bellamy, that's interesting. Very viable Premier League striker. Played for loads of clubs. Peter Crouch, Kevin Gallagher. Keep reading now. Juan Pablo Angel, Coutinho, okay, not a striker. Deeney, Johnson, Lampard, yeah, midfielder, fine. Zola, Kanu. And then the closest is 285 minutes is Theo Walcott, who played pretty much his entire career at Premier League level. So those are the players that have got a slightly better goal scoring, goals per minute that were frequent Premier League scorers. These are the ones that Mitrovic is better than. Clint Dempsey, Jay Rodriguez, Ian Rush, ignore that. Again, he played his best stuff before the Premier League was a thing. Kevin Campbell, Carlton Cole, Niall Quinn. Ignore the midfielders because obviously elite midfielders will compare in terms of goals output with maybe middling Premier League strikers. Yaya Toure, Dirk Cow, Perez, Long, Arnautovic, Rod Wallace, Brian Deane, who most people would consider a good Premier League striker. He scored the first ever Premier League goal. Jason Ewell, okay, Scholes, Gerrard. Darius Vassell and Emil Heskey, both England players, both played a long time in the Premier League, both have a worse goals per minute record than Mitrovic. Amiobi, Sigurdsson, Beckham, Zamora, Dean Saunders, all got worse goal scores per minute records than Mitrovic. Agbonlahor, Ericsson, okay, not a striker. Mark Hughes, again, played a lot of stuff before the Premier League was being. Lundberg, Mata and Kiel. So, what I think we're finding is, obviously, look, there's a few outliers, players that we would say are obviously way better players than... No one's saying that Mitrovic is better than Dennis Bergkamp. That's ridiculous, obviously. But when you account for the role, and maybe a few of them playing, there's Ian Rush on the list and Peter Beardsley, obviously were incredible players before the Premier League started. Mark Hughes too. And then there's the midfielders and wingers that were elite and have got in on the list. But I'm seeing a lot of workaday, decent Premier League strikers that were relied upon for clubs in the mid-table and avoiding relegation. And again, the likes of Jason Ewell, Brian Dean, Darius Vassell, Emil Heskey. Emil Heskey played at the top level, really did for England and Liverpool. Amiobi, Zamora, Saunders, Agbonlahor. None of them, the point I'm making, and they've all got worse goals per minute records than Mitrovic. So they've all had more opportunity. And this is not to say, look, no one's got a crystal ball. This is not to say that had Mitrovic had those opportunities, he's going to score goals. We don't know. We can only go on the evidence of what he's done so far. But what he's done so far is on average more prolific than a lot of those strikers who everyone would frankly consider not elite strikers, but certainly not failures and flops. So here is my view. I think you've probably figured it out by now. But on the basis of his Premier League record, it's wrong to say that Mitrovic is a failure at Premier League level. I just don't think it's right. I think when you factor in the goals that he's scored, 24 in 76 appearances adjusted in terms of minutes for complete appearances, and the limited opportunities he's had so far, I just don't think you can say it's a failure. For a failure, you would be looking at, well, first of all, they wouldn't make 76 appearances. And secondly, you'd be looking at someone who'd made 50 to 60 appearances maybe, and they'd only scored 3 or 4 goals, 5 goals, goal every 10 games or something. I don't know. That sounds like a failure to me rather than someone who scores 1 every 3. So there you go. 24 goals, 10 assists in 76 games isn't bad. It's just not bad, is it? Especially when you consider he's been relegated 3 times. That is the key thing, isn't it? That he's been relegated. He's played in bad teams. So again, we use Michael Antonio or Danny Ings as an example. Ings is played for Southampton for a lot. He's played for Liverpool. He got the big move, didn't he? He's played for Burnley and done well as well. Down at, I think he outscored Mitrovic, didn't he? He got a 12 somewhere in there, Ings possibly. But I think there's a good comparison of a player who has had the opportunities that Mitrovic hasn't had yet to play for a slightly better team. Look, this is important. He's not a top-level Premier League striker. Nobody's saying he's an elite, GOAT-level Championship striker, but that's not relevant. That's not what people say. They say he's a flop at Premier League level. Of course he's not a top-level Premier League striker. I also contend he'd score a decent amount in a side that didn't get relegated. Stick him in where Ings is at Aston Villa, where Antonio is at West Ham, perhaps. What would he do? Would he do the pressing that Bamford does for Leeds? I don't know. Calvert-Lewin's job at Everton. I think he'd get goals. So maybe it's opportunity rather than the fact that he's a flop. And boring as it sounds, he's probably a pretty solid middle-of-the-road Premier League striker. And this is where we get into the whys and wherefores, which I'll do to just conclude. It's just a bit boring, isn't it? I think people want the narrative to be, this guy's amazing at Championship level and isn't he awful at Premier League level? That sounds salacious and interesting, whereas the truth is he's really good at Championship level, he's all right at Premier League level, he's done fine, and hasn't really had the opportunities to do too much more than play for relegated teams, and in his most recent season, not even play. Let's look at why the issue. So I think people have it wrong. I think there's a myth being perpetuated here, only just a myth. I don't think he's a great Premier League striker. I think he's a middling Premier League striker, probably on the basis of the evidence. But the first thing is I do think it's a simplistic but juicy narrative, isn't it? Football fans and people, when they're debating, they love to simplify and make everything a zero-sum binary game. And I think that's what people are doing. He's brilliant in the Championship and he's rubbish in the Premier League. Just rolls off the tongue. Is it true? Not sure. I've put there housery. There's obviously an element of people just winding up the Fulham fans, isn't it? And that's football. That's the football debate. And whether it's a good thing to wind up and banter people or not, it's up to you whether you rise to it or not. Maybe I've risen to it, but hopefully I've risen to it in a way where I've, done lots of research and I've now been talking about it for 29 minutes. I do think there is a recency bias, and that is fair enough, isn't it? From that 1920, sorry, not even the 1920 season. I think I've got that the wrong number on there. I mean the 2021 season. There's a recency bias that his last tilt at the Premier League was bad. It was bad. There were mitigating factors as well, though, in terms of falling out with Parker, COVID, not actually playing that many minutes. 6 goal contributions in 1,300 minutes. Double it, and it's 12. And if he played more minutes, he probably would have got them, wouldn't he? So, yeah, recency bias. And I do think the biggest one is actually people are making Premier League judgments based on Championship goals. I think there's a weird thing going on that every goal Mitrovic scores, the myth about his Premier League form, even though what he does in the Championship isn't relevant to his Premier League form, I think that myth gets exaggerated. And I think people are viewing it as a zero-sum game, that success at Championship level means failure at Premier League level, even though he's not currently playing there when he's scoring goals at Championship level. We have a similar thing in lots of political issues, particularly maybe between genders, men and women, and left and right, where people view success in one area as a failure in another, when sometimes there's not actually a joined up line between the two. There we go. That is the Mitrovic myth. Hopefully I've been fairly balanced about it. And look, if you are just a banterous house and you just want to wind everyone up and have a pop at a player, it's probably not the video for you. So if we can try and make the comments balanced. Look, you can go further than I have, and you can look into, has he missed a lot of big chances? Maybe compare Danny Ings, and, you might be able to reasonably argue back to me, well, Ben, I accept what you're saying in terms of if he gets the opportunities, would he take them? I don't think he would take them, because that's fine. Let's have a balanced discussion about it. But hopefully, there's a few more layers to this than just counting up his Championship goals, seeing that there's way more than the Premier League, and assuming that means he's good at one and bad at the other. Hopefully, if anything, I've debunked that as a premise and a theory. It's pretty reductive, isn't it, to say, oh, what you do over here means you're bad over here. No, what you do over here means whether you're good or bad or over. But look, it's an interesting debate. It's one I've wanted to do for a while, because I do think, and I have to say, I don't want to be a complete apologist. I don't know the guy. I don't support Fulham. I really admire what he's done in the Championship. But I do think people attack him unfairly. And I think sometimes as well, I didn't mention this, there's a little bit of envy from Championship fans who he's banging the goals in against. It's like, oh, well, I can't stop him scoring against my team, but I could slag off his Premier League goal scoring record and make a judgment based on that. I think there's an element of that as well. Anyway, hopefully you found this fun. I've gone longer than I wanted to. I thought this would be a pithy little 10-minute video, but we've gone over half an hour now. So thank you if you have watched the whole thing. If you're new to the channel, please do hit subscribe. Loads and loads of Championship content here. We do look at the dearly departed teams in the Premier League. Maybe we'll be looking at Mitrovic and his record next year. And again, please, 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 people struggle sometimes in debates, particularly online. Let's discuss in a civil manner. There's no need to insult either me or the player we're talking about or anyone else. Let's get our views across in a calm way, and we can have a great discussion. And hopefully I've started that off, and I'll finish by saying we don't know, do we? We don't know what he's going to do next time he gets up there. And look, I will be the first one to come on here online if he makes a right Horlicks and plays 35 games and scores 2 goals next season. I will be the first one to say, on the basis of the evidence I have now, maybe he is a flop at Premier League level. But as it stands, I do not think that's the case. And that is why I believe saying that Mitrovic is a flop at Premier League level is the Mitrovic myth. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's a lovely big over and out from me.